actually work for a venture capital fund, and we have been very active in the technology space for the last 10 years. We've made around 99 investments, and I tend to work very actively with a lot of our portfolio companies. And the messaging space is something that I've been very interested in for over a decade, I think, since around 2005, a large telco asked me to work with them to understand the future of messaging. So it was interesting about a week ago when I got a call from the organizers of this conference, and they said, could you say something about the future of messaging? So my view of the future of messaging is different now than it was then, but it's an incredibly interesting space. It's evolved tremendously, and I think we'll continue to see a great deal of evolution and change in this space. But I wanted, in terms of talking about the evolution, I wanted to start not at the beginning with carrier pigeons, but actually in the early days of the digital era with IRC. Some of you, and I can't really tell without my glasses on how many of you might be old enough to remember these days, but yeah, it was pretty clunky, but it worked, and it was exciting to talk to in real-time conversations, sometimes with people you didn't really even know. It was very exciting. But that evolved relatively quickly to what seemed like a proliferation of instant messaging services. We had MSN, we had Yahoo, we had ICQ, AOL Instant Messenger, each with a pretty large audience. Pretty big, substantial chunk of the digital world revolved around this. All the kids were on it. And we thought, yeah, how can all of these services survive and thrive? But then we went into the world of mobile, and we thought, if we thought there were quite a few instant messaging services before, I mean, this is in no way representative of the number of instant messaging services we have now on mobile. There are possibly hundreds of instant messaging services on mobile, and to some degree that represents a lowering of the barriers to entry in the space. It's easier to make an instant messaging app. It's not so easy, I have to say, to make an instant messaging application or service that actually scales to accommodate millions of users. That's a challenge. But it's pretty easy to get started comparatively. And what we're seeing with this proliferation is a fragmentation of audience. And to a large extent, a specialization of some of these players as they start to focus in on their core audience from a demographic perspective, from a type of communication perspective, or from the type of service they want to offer. And so you're just scanning through here, we can see some of them are geographically focused or constrained a little bit, like Line. Snapchat clearly changing from its starting point where they targeted the younger end of the spectrum with an opportunity to share things that they didn't want to be retained. Skype, which actually was one of the companies that my fund invested in, Skype with Microsoft has become more and more corporate, and Palringo, the company I'm very much involved with now, has evolved to focus on games because they found that actually a lot of their users weren't so much using their application to talk to people that they already knew. They were using the application to talk to people they didn't know but who were into the same stuff, or more specifically, playing the same game. And so I think what we can conclude safely is that messaging is absolutely, undeniably a key part of the digital ecosystem. And this proliferation that we see on mobile is driving a certain degree of specialization. And that specialization, and this is critical, the specialization is driving a depth of engagement. And so instead of arguing about who has 400 million and who has 1 billion and who has 200 million, I mean, if you added up the number of users that each of those players claims to have, you would have a figure that's greater than the population of the world. Part of that is people over-reporting their numbers, but part of it is representing the fact that consumers tend to use multiple of these services for different things. And so this was an interesting part in my thought process when I stepped back and was thinking about the evolution of messaging. I felt actually I had to also think about the evolution of human-computer interaction, because I think this is an important aspect. And you'll see from my slides here that I discovered you can include animated GIFs in your PowerPoint presentations now, in case you didn't know that. That's quite handy. But what I thought was interesting is if you trace things back and you think about the early days of personal computing, early days of the internet, it was command line driven, it was textual. And of course, then we moved from that to the early graphical user interfaces and early web. And I put up here one of the examples of Apple's best principles in user interface design on the web, probably late 90s. But much of the talk and all of the talk was really about graphical user interfaces and how consumers interact with services. But actually, very interestingly, as mobile has matured from a smartphone perspective, we stopped talking so much about user interface. We started talking about user experience. And we've seen great progress in terms of defining new ways for consumers to interact with services, to share information, and to engage users. But what we've started to see now is the user experience becoming much more conversational, both in a textual and a vocal sense. And I think this is an incredibly interesting step. And I think that it's almost full circle in terms of thinking back to what I showed earlier with the command line interface. Command line was very rigid, very structured, very formal. There's a command, you do the command in the right way, and you get a specific response back. And now what we're talking about is a conversational experience, which is unstructured. And some of you may be thinking, hey, I thought we already had that. So I just put this clip in to remind you that actually that was a movie. And what I'm not going to cover in this discussion is that stage of evolution where the computer starts talking back to us. I'm going to draw the line at the point where we're talking to it. So we're starting to see really this shift in the nature of interaction. The original command line interactions have evolved to what I call this conversational command line interaction. And we're seeing that enable a mixture of server and service response. So a mixture of automated server response, but also the opportunity to blend that with actual human interaction to give a more personalized experience. And I've included an example here from a company that I've had some conversations with that is looking at the world of banking and recognizing the fact that, you know, whether it's just something that we don't like doing or whether it's awkward from a user interface perspective, a lot of us need an easier way to engage with the financial information that's critical to us. And this application is showing an interaction between a user, very textually asking, hey, what's my balance? Where am I compared to my budget, compared to my plan for the month? And presenting that in a very conversational way makes it less formal, makes it less scary for some people, makes it more engaging, and just massively increases the accessibility. What I think is also interesting in terms of evolution, and referring to Palringo, the company that is in our portfolio that I work with very actively, is the way that games and social are converging. And Palringo is very much focused on both bringing social into games that you play on their own, but also bringing games into the chat experience. So people are sitting there talking. Sometimes the game is the excuse for them to come and to hang out and to have a chat. But sometimes the game is substantial enough for them to come in and specifically play the game. And I doubt that this video is going to play, but the company's focused on building a kind of converged chat and graphical user interface that allows users to be playing the game and interacting with the chat at the same time, coordinating their team play around this particular game, which is just pending launch and revolves around that eternal struggle between ninjas and pirates. So I think the interesting question that I was asked when I was preparing for this presentation was, are chat services the new platform? Is everything going to actually converge on chat services as the next big platform, the next big opportunity? And I think if you actually do the research and look at the recent talk, you could almost reach that conclusion. There's a lot of chatter from Facebook, from the WhatsApp people about all of the services that they're going to build in there. Snapchat are very actively talking about their plans for the future. But in my view, I think that chat services really represent a new dimension of service delivery, of service aggregation, a new dimension of a user interface. It's interesting because mobile messaging users are always on. To a certain degree, you could look at this as an evolution of the notifications. You can actually, as a service provider, talk to end users. And brands integrating with messaging platforms can really offer this one-to-one customer service, much more personalized content, personalized interaction at a very scalable price point. And then users can use these messaging platforms for everything to a certain degree without having to switch apps. And going back to the banking experience, you're probably all familiar with that scenario where you think, I just need to check my bank balance, and you go and you realize the bank's released a new version of their application that you've got to go download, and it's 100 meg, and you download it, and then you realize you've got to authenticate, and you left your little bank dongle at home, so it's all hopeless, and you've just wasted half an hour. But it is not going to be the only dimension. It is not going to subsume everything. And I think it's interesting, going back to that banking example, to consider you might use the mobile application with a chat every day just to check in on things, just understand where you're at. Can I afford to go out tonight? What's my balance? How am I doing? But once a week or so, you're going to have to face reality and sit down and do some more serious thinking about your finances, maybe plan things out a little bit. And then maybe once in a while, you're still going to have to go to the bank and explain to the bank manager why you really needed that car that cost 10 times more than that car. So it is a new dimension. It represents new opportunities. And so I think you're really, in conclusion, I think inescapably we have to conclude that messaging is a key component of the digital ecosystem. The proliferation will continue to drive specialization, and that will be regional, it will be demographic, and it will be functional. And I think that we will see messaging emerge really as this new dimension. We'll see a lot of innovation, I would say, over the next 18 to 24 months in terms of providing services via a textual chat interface. And in gaming, we'll see new types of games and deeper social engagement and social integration within the games world. So I think we'll continue to see a whole range of really exciting change in this space over the next 24 months. I could go on, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or happy to discuss this at length with anyone who wants to afterwards.